Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the first time, a massive welcome to the community. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. It is our latest Ask an Advisor, where we take your questions from the Equity Mates community and put them to some of Australia's best financial advisors. Today in the studio, we're joined by Glen Hare, the co-founder of Fox and Hare Advisory, one of Australia's best financial advisors. I think winner of Financial Advisor of the Year last year.
Yeah.
So glad to have him in the studio. Glen, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, guys.
So as always, we've taken your questions and broken them into three themes for today. So we're going to start with questions related to those that are in their young, free part of their life, post-uni, just starting out in work. Then we're going to chat about the accumulator stage in life, and then close out with those that are looking to start a family or thinking about the bigger life events. So let's crack into it.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's start with what Bryce has labelled young and free.
Yeah.
The good old days. So
Because we're all so old.
Yeah.
Sure. Free then.
Yeah. Before the drudgery of life becomes a burden. So I think, a lot of people listening, or a lot of people find our podcasts when they're sort of just finished uni, just finished their trade, they're working full time, and they're starting to earn more than they're spending for the first time in their life. So if someone comes to you as an advice client at that point, what are some of those first priorities, those first building blocks financially they should be putting in place?
The first thing that comes to mind is a really clear cash flow strategy. Why is that? Because as you just touched on, Ren, this is the first time that this is the biggest amount of money that they've ever been earning. It's really important that they have really clear visibility over that. And in terms of touching on the free component, potentially this is the point. Not only they just started earning a good income, this is at a point where potentially their bills are going to be the lowest ever in their life.
Yeah.
Like maybe they're earning money and they have the opportunity to stick around at home with the parents. So their disposable income is massive. They're still eating food out of the fridge, or they've moved in with a few mates and they're house sharing and they're still open to pre-drinking before they head out, so they're not paying $25.
That's young and free.
That's young and free. You're not paying $25 for a cocktail. You're paying $25 for a bottle of vodka. So their opportunity to make really smart decisions around their cash flow and have a really clear understanding in terms of what's left at the end of each month and do something with that is massive.
I think we should just clip buying $25 bottles of vodka and then running into their opportunity to make smart decisions is high. So getting your cash flow sorted, when people have that cash flow sorted, they're spending less than they're earning.
Yep.
Any first steps in what they should do with that?
So I'd love for them to be considering investing in the stock market. And why the stock market potentially over property? You can start small, right? And that's one of the key advantages. You can, if your disposable income is 500, 1,000, or if you've got the opportunity to live at home, it could be significantly more than that. Putting funds in the market is going to have a huge compounding long-term impact on that overall wealth position. And also acknowledging that someone that's just fresh out of uni or fresh out of a trade may not have a really clear understanding in terms of what the goals are. And this is a big risk that I do see a lot for a lot of those that are young and free, in that because we're not clear in terms of what the goals are, we then just blow the cash. So being really disciplined around consistently investing a regular amount on an ongoing basis, not being super clear and potentially in terms of what those goals are, will enable you to have more choice in the years to come. 5 years into your job, you might be like, okay, cool. Actually, property is something that I'm keen on. I want to get my own place. I'm sick of my roommates or whatever the case may be. You've then built a really nice nest egg to give you that choice to move on that goal, if that's the goal for you.
So sticking with the same persona, just out of uni, 12 months into a full-time work, bit of free cash flow. How should we think about debt management? So the consumer side, I came out of uni with a bit of credit card debt, but also HEX debt is there. And then thinking about, I guess, good debt in terms of either leveraging into the stock market or thinking about property. So talk us through how we should think about that at this stage.
So I'll start on HEX debt. So over the last, if I think about the last 10 years, it's really the last probably 2-3 years that HEX has even been a conversation with our members. Prior to that, you're paying 1 or potentially less than 1%, or the debt was being indexed at such a low percentage. This financial year, so next year, it's probably going to go up by around, well, who knows, if you've got a crystal ball, around 3-4%. So it's going to go up at a much lower point than it did last year or the year before, around that 7%. So it becomes a question around, okay, should I be paying off HEX that's being indexed at 3 or 4%, or could I put my money in something else that's going to generate a greater return? Whether that be property, even a high interest savings bank account at the moment would give you more than that, or obviously the stock market. So HEX for probably a 24-month fleeting period was like, crap, that really stung. Now it's starting to come back to more questionable levels around, is this or is this not a priority? In terms of consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, car loans, coming out of uni with a bit of debt is okay, but we want to be smashing that down as fast as possible. Like if we're racking up debt on a credit card and we're paying interest on that credit card at 25%, there's not a great deal of point in putting money in a high interest savings account that's giving us 4 or 5% and then paying 20 on the other side. So we want to reduce that. Similarly with personal loans, there's potentially an opportunity to consolidate your debts through a personal loan. Sometimes they come in at around 10-11% at the moment, so ideally paying off a little bit less interest. Another opportunity that we've certainly seen work quite well with those that have been in a position where they've accumulated a little bit of consumer debt is have a chat to the provider. So have a chat to whoever's given you that credit card and say, hey, I'm trying to get this paid off. Can you give me an interest-free period? Can you reduce the interest rate for a period so I have a greater chance of paying it off? And in my experience, most of the providers have been willing to play ball. And that could just simply be one conversation for them to change what that interest rate is. Mind you, if you are successful in that and you manage to get 12 months with no interest, you've got to use that 12 months. You want to use that 12 months and really smash that down. The other one, for the car lovers on the phone, I get really nervous when young people go out and buy a brand new car and take out a huge car loan. It can set them back years, right? And for those listening that have a car loan, please don't lose heart and go, what have I done? It just being conscious about the fact that you are, paying interest on that debt, and you're paying interest on debt that's attributed to an asset that will likely go down in value. So just thinking about if you were to take out a $30,000 loan to invest in the stock market versus a $30,000 loan to invest in a car, your future you in 3-5 years' time is going to look at those decisions very differently.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Challenging.
Yeah. Let's turn to property, speaking of challenging. And I want to preface this question with something I heard recently on the You're in Good Company podcast. They were speaking about something that's been labeled the Coachella Effect. So obviously come out of the US. And essentially what researchers have found is even as cost of living crisis is biting, interest rates are rising, and young people are feeling more and more hopeless about their financial situation, what that has translated to is actually young people spending more on things like Coachella. And the researchers attribute it to this feeling of like, well, I'm never going to be able to afford a house or reach my financial goals anyway, so I may as well just say effort and spend.
Yeah.
So for people that are feeling that Coachella effect, feeling like their goals have never been further away, and in Australia, property is a big one.
Yeah.
How do you speak to your clients about thinking about saving for a home and getting on that journey when they're, in this young and free early stage of their career and it feels so far away?
Yeah, great question, and something that comes up quite regularly. Although I can't relate to Coachella, I'm a bit more of a Tomorrowland kind of guy.
Oh, nice.
But in terms of, and I feel the media has played a big part in this around the fact that people feel so disenfranchised by the state of our property market at the moment, and people are going, this is never. I'm never going to be able to get on the ladder, and therefore just kind of putting their hands up in the air, and that really worries me. In that, if you have a really clear game plan in line with a really clear goal, then you can purchase property. I'm not denying the fact that it's going to be hard. I'm not denying the fact that there is huge issues, systemic issues in our property market here in Australia, but you can do it. And in terms of how you go about it, being really clear on the goal. So first, and property is a broad spectrum. So, but kind of being really narrowing it down. There's the investment property. So if you're in those early years, considering an investment property and rent vesting, for want of a better word, is certainly a viable option to get you on the property ladder. So renting where you want to live, but purchasing an investment property to enable your money to work as hard as possible, taking advantage of leverage, but also thinking about the fact that, again, if you are in those youngest years and you still are potentially at home, your capacity to save the deposit is fairly significant, in that your disposable income could be quite high. And if you are focused on the home over the investment property, and there's pros and cons to both, think about what would be the entry point for you. So don't think, all right, I'm never going to buy the huge 4-bedroom house where I'm going to have start a family potentially. Think about what would be a really good first stepping stone. Is it a one-bedder in the city? And if it's a one-bedder in the city, have a look on realestate.com. Have a look at the properties that have sold in the area that you want to purchase. Have a look at some of those price points. Don't look at what's for sale. Have a look at what's sold, because that's going to give you a much clearer indication in terms of what things are actually going for. And work backwards from that. So if you're looking at let's just say a $700,000 one-bedroom apartment, then in order to get a 10% deposit, you need $70,000. Right. So then if you go, okay, I'd be really happy for my first home to be a $700,000 one-bedroom apartment. It's not the forever home. And then I have a chat to a mortgage broker and I go, okay, $70,000 is the target. You've then got a really clear indication of what success looks like. And if you go to Coachella or Tomorrowland, then that may push that goal back by 6 or 12 months. But if you don't have a clear goal, going to Coachella or Tomorrowland, it's going to have absolutely no impact on the goal because you don't have a goal.
Yeah.
And the goal may shift, and that's okay, but really try and be quite definitive about what success looks like, so that you know whether you're progressing or not, and the decisions that you make from a lifestyle perspective will have an impact or not.
Speaking from personal experience, at that stage in my life, I had a loosely defined house deposit savings account that I would kind of say, oh yeah, at some point in the future, I want to buy a house. And so you'd kind of put a bit of money in there. Coachella or some festival would come along and it would get stripped right back out.
Yeah.
And I think looking back on it, one of the biggest challenges, as you've just said, was actually defining what that goal was. And in hindsight, I reckon the biggest thing you can do for free is actually go and speak to a mortgage broker, because you can speak to them about, this is what I want to achieve. They can talk you through how things can be structured. They can talk you through deposit amounts. They can give you the spreadsheets, all for free, and really actually help you understand, if I do want to buy something in 10 years, what's that number that I'm looking for, rather than waiting until that point in time.
Yeah,
and that would help put a bit of a definition around what you're saving for.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So that was our first persona that we want to cover off today, as Bryce called it, young and free. Getting your money sorted, trying to figure out what your goals are, and get your cash flow has really the sort of the headline there. The next persona we want to move to is accumulators, where, you know, you're probably late 20s, early 30s, you're taking some steps in your career and...
Not so young, not so free.
The hairline's receding, the shoulders are slumping.
Yeah, bags under the eyes.
And I think at this stage, you know, the major life events are on the horizon, but perhaps not quite there yet. You know, settling down with a family, perhaps having kids, a mortgage, all of that stuff. So we're labeling this persona the accumulators.
Yeah.
And so let's start general, and then there's some specific questions and themes that sort of come through. But just generally, what are some of the financial milestones that someone in this stage of life should have maybe achieved or maybe be thinking about or on their path to achieving at this point?
So, I mean, if we're thinking about an accumulator as someone that is about to embark on potentially some pretty big decisions, getting married, buying a house, you know, starting a family, we want to make sure that we understand our current state of play. So, and that is everything from our cash flow, how much we have the capacity to save and invest. We want to understand what our super is doing. So we've been working for a decade. Where has your money been going for the last decade? What are you invested in? What fees are you being charged? What's the performance of the portfolio? And you'd also want to be really conscious about your tax position as well. Again, this is a point where you've been working for a decade, your income has gone up, the amount of tax that you have paid has definitely gone up. So making sure that we're understanding how to manage and minimize tax on any future investment or financial decisions that we make. So at this point, you want to be in a position where you understand the current state of play. In terms of how to map out the next couple of years, so the big ticket items, often weddings. So weddings is something that comes up a lot in conversations, certainly in our member base. And statistics tell us that in Australia, weddings cost anywhere between $35,000 and $65,000. I have seen weddings cost less. One of our members went to Vegas and got married by Elvis. For $195.
Wow. Well, I mean, they also went to Vegas.
Yeah,
they also went.
Surely you
So
include
this
the
is what they
flights in
did.
that.
So this is what they did.
Creative accounting.
Yeah.
They budgeted $30,000 for the wedding, right?
Okay.
And they thought, is this really what we want to do? And so they went to Vegas. They got married, and it wasn't $195. They actually paid an extra $50 to get Elvis to play another song. So it ended up being about $250, and they budgeted $30,000 for the wedding.
And then they put the rest of it on black.
Yeah.
Better. If black came through, then that would have been good. But they actually took 3 months off work and just traveled the world.
Nice.
Yes.
And they live streamed the wedding for those that didn't attend. I think the immediate family was there, but that was their decision. Anyway, I don't know how we went on that tangent, but weddings are a big cost.
They are, yeah.
Right? And they say 35 to 65 grand, but I've seen, again, weddings for less and certainly weddings for a lot more. So we need to plan for that. It's a cost. We do see sometimes people take out consumer debt in order to fund that. Providers that as soon as they know it's a wedding, they're tripling their prices. I think Kyle and Jackie O did something on this years ago, and they planned the exact same party. One party planner didn't say it's a wedding, and the other one did, and the cost was like 3 times the price.
You just see it in flowers alone. It's ridiculous.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway. Everyone's decision. There's no right or wrong. It's whatever feels right for you. The next is buying a property. This is typically when people start to get a little bit more serious. Broad generalization around what the property play is going to be. You know, they've had a really good 20s. They've probably not given their finances a huge amount of focus, but they're like, okay. I'm ticking up, in income, like things are getting a little bit serious. I'd love to think about, potentially starting a family, and property starts to become a bit more of a priority if it hadn't in the past. you want to have a really clear understanding of what success looks like. So if we come back to the milestones, probably no different to the person fresh out of uni, we want to be thinking about that property play, but looking at it over the next 5 years. And what I mean by that is around that period is when people start to think about, oh, okay, am I comfortable renting if I were to start a family? And what I have observed is that that's typically around, that's kind of the tipping point where people go, oh, if I start a family, I want to have my own place. That's not the be all and end all. That's not for everyone, but that's generally when I've seen or observed our members kind of flip their mindset from don't care what I invest in, just want to make money, want to make sure it works as hard as possible, happy to keep renting. When the baby conversation happens, that's when things start to change a little bit. So if you're looking at property, we don't want to be just looking at the next 12 months. We want to be looking at, okay, can I envisage myself and my partner in this property with a little one? And if it is a one-bedder or a two-bedroom apartment, for example, how long are we comfortable to be in a one or a two-bed apartment with a little one? And that might be until they start school, and then the conversation progresses like, okay, potentially at that point we may need to upgrade the property, but we also need to think about catchment areas in terms of schooling for the kids. So it's interesting, the property and the family piece do overlay each other quite a bit, and it's typically around that, late 20s, early 30s where the property piece becomes much more apparent. And we want to be thinking about it not just the immediate. You want to be envisaging yourself in the property with that little one and thinking about, is this a 5-year play, or is this close to where the schools are and going to potentially be longer?
I was talking to an advisor, that just reminds me, talking to an advisor at one of our live events down in Melbourne, and he was just saying where he lives, it's crazy to see the impact on property in the houses where there are public schools and all of these families just moving there so that they can be in the catchment zone, and the property prices just go through the roof.
Yeah.
So unfortunate. It's just like, this is the world we live in. Anyway, side note.
Remember, we're not young and free anymore.
We're not young and free, yeah. So what are the core principles at Fox and Hare when it comes to just actually building wealth? Like, do you have certain savings rates that you're trying to, get towards? Not so much products, but just like, core principles or philosophies that drive your wealth building strategies.
Very broad question, but
how do we get rich?
How do we get rich? So define rich, and we do a lot of work with our members on defining, we don't refer to as rich, but defining financial freedom. Because looking at our data, that is one of the things that comes up consistently across our member base. So we do a lot of work trying to work out what is financial freedom. And in terms of wealth, I would argue we often peg our conversations not to necessarily a net worth, but more around a level of passive income. The reason I say that is because you could live in a house that's worth a lot of money, but still have to work every single day, either to pay the mortgage or to live the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to. But if you've built wealth, whatever that figure may be, that generates a certain level of passive income, this is what's going to give you greater freedom, greater flexibility, and greater choice in terms of the decisions that you make from a life perspective. So that's where we start. In terms of building the wealth, whatever that level may be, in order to generate passive income, there's a number of levers to that. So first, again, getting really clear on the cash flow, and I bang on about it all the time, and I think our members probably get sick of me talking about it, but the less they spend on Coachella, on Bugaboo prams, on 150 bottles of wine, the more we have to invest, the sooner they'll generate that net worth that they desire to give them the level of passive income that's going to give them freedom. It's about finding the right balance though. Like again, a lot of people, and I can tell when we first sit down and have a chat with a prospective member, they're a little bit nervous that we're going to tell them, all right, no more Coachella, no more nice wine, we're tapering everything back. And That is not the case, but we do a lot of work with our members to make sure that they understand the decisions that they're making in the short term and the compounding impact over the medium and the long term. And in terms of building wealth, I love property. I'm invested in real property. I love the stock market. I'm invested in the stock market and regularly do so. I'm very clear in terms of what my super funds are doing, or super fund is doing. And I know exactly how much disposable income I have on a monthly basis and exactly where that is going. So in order to build wealth, we need to be really clear in terms of what is our capacity to save and invest in order to build wealth. And we need to be really clear and proactive around the decisions that we're making in order how to allocate those savings and what we're investing in. Too often, again, I see, and this is not necessarily no fault of their own. Everyone has different degrees of financial literacy, but they're not making proactive decisions. And that will cost you, particularly, again, in this accumulation phase. If you've been working for 10 years, you don't have any kids yet, then in terms of your disposable income, before the mortgage, before you start a family, it's probably going to be, again, it's at that sweet spot and that high point before all the additional costs come along with again, starting a family, schooling, and the mortgage. So use that time to be really clear and proactive. And also, every single investment decision that you make is going to have tax implications. So make sure that you are investing, whether it be property, shares, in terms of the structures, whether it be investment bond, personal names, trusts, whatever the case may be. We're really conscious about the tax implications of the investments that we're making. And, really simple example or mistake that I see people make in every relationship, there's usually one that's probably more into the numbers than the other. That's just an observation. And what I've seen is the person that's potentially more engaged, more likely to save or invest. They're saving and investing in their personal name, and potentially they're on the higher income than their counterpart. So all of their investments and their money sitting in their high interest savings account is being taxed at potentially a higher marginal tax rate than if they were just investing through their partner, who's potentially on a lower marginal tax rate. That's a really simple example, but it's something that we see quite regularly as well. So I guess coming back to your question, wealth is important, but I would argue it's the investment income that's going to give you more flexibility. Wealth is kind of the means to get you there, and then just be really proactive in terms of how you're investing and what you're investing in off the back of the disposable income.
So one final question for this accumulator persona, and it's to do with future planning, because I think a lot of us, I think we're in this accumulator stage. We're so focused on like the goals that are just on the horizon. We're probably not thinking about what is beyond that. But we all know, the power of long-term compounding and the importance of giving yourself time to achieve some of those financial goals. So aside from the obvious, which is setting up your superannuation and salary sacrificing if you can afford it, all that stuff with super, what are some of the other things that are often overlooked at this accumulator stage of life when it comes to setting yourself up for the long future?
So don't give up on your regular investment strategy outside super. So super's great, as we all know, from a tax perspective, but don't give up on your regular investment strategy, because that money it will just get lost in the wash if you do. And even if you do need to taper it back, make sure that you are still consistently putting a certain amount away on a monthly or regular basis. The other thing is, because there are some fairly significant milestones in this cohort around the wedding, the property, and certainly starting a family, thinking about what happens after that. So the key goals that we see kind of moving into those that probably just move out of this cohort is private schooling. So starting to think about putting aside funds for private schooling, whether that be through an education bond, which has tax benefits. The regular investment piece is around that trying to drive towards that passive income piece that you're going to want post these couple of milestones. So don't forget about it in the short term. That will have compounding impact. Something that gets overlooked, and it's not the most exciting piece of work that we do, but it is something that we talk about regularly with our members in this cohort, is thinking about insurance. And I know that's probably going to put a dampener on the conversation, but if you're taking out debt, starting a family, something doesn't go quite to plan, you've got to make sure that you understand what insurance you do have and what insurance you don't have. So like all of your other financial decisions, being really clear around what that random default stuff is through your super fund and whether you're comfortable with it. You're paying for it, so you may as well know what it's doing, but then making a proactive decision around, okay, there's a lot of reliance on my income to keep all of this happening. How do I make sure that if something did happen, that'll continue to come through?
Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, Glenn, we're going to take a very quick break, but just a reminder that if you want to chat to Glenn and the team or any of the advisors in the Equity Mates network, head to equitymates.com/advice. There's a form there that you can fill out with all of your information, and we'll make sure that we connect you with Glenn or an appropriate advisor. But we're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we're going to unpack setting up for a family and big milestones later on in life. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Equity Mates. We're here with Glen Hare from Fox & Hare doing an Ask an Advisor. Now, Glenn, to close out this episode, we want to talk about setting up a family or those sort of big decisions later on in life. So we'll start with estate planning. What considerations need to be taken into account when you're in that accumulator phase, thinking about a family?
Yeah. So an estate plan is really to ensure that if something were to happen to you, your loved ones would be taken care of. So the three key things that stand out to me is make sure that you know who the nomination is on your super fund. So that if something were to happen to you, those funds would be paid to who you had nominated on your super fund, and it'll make sure that the process is much smoother.
Where do you do that?
So you have to complete. So you have to complete a form, and super funds require that the form is physical. So you need to find a printer somewhere, and it also needs to be witnessed twice.
Okay.
Do you do it when you set it up?
You can do it at any time. You can do it when you set it up, but you can do it right now if you've had a super fund for a decade.
Okay.
So make sure that you nominate who you want those funds to go to. Again, it just ensures that if something were to happen, it would happen in a much more smooth manner. The second is life insurance. So you can again nominate a beneficiary for those that have insurance through their super funds. It can be a fairly even the default cover can still be a fairly significant sum of money, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. So again, nominating a beneficiary on that policy inside your super fund or elsewhere if you have a policy that's not a default cover. And the third is an estate plan. So speaking to an estate lawyer and making sure that, again, a really clear will was drafted so that if something were to happen, your finances would be managed in the way that you would want them to. So they're really the key three components, and it might be it's potentially a fairly simple. We're still not so young, not so free, but our lives haven't gotten that complicated yet. It could be a fairly simple and not ridiculously expensive process to do so, and it just means that if anything were to happen with your family, obviously going through a lot with your passing, everything would be taken care of, and it'd be a much smoother process.
So I'm going to put my hand up. I haven't done any of those things. And I see a lot of ads for like
Will Safe.
Safe Will.
Safe Will.
And like other services like that.
Yeah.
Are they legit, or do you have to actually go to a lawyer?
For all the Will Safe listeners.
They might be a lawyer. I don't know. I don't want to disparage them.
One of our mates used it and set it up.
But is it legit? Because you can't
You'd hope so.
You can't just like write a note saying like I leave all my assets to Bryce and sign it. That doesn't stand up, I don't think.
So
I think it's legal.
I am not an estate lawyer.
Yeah, okay. Neither am I, if you haven't guessed.
But what I'm going to get Will safe. I don't even know. Is that the real name? I don't know.
Safe Will.
Safe Will calling me. But I'm probably a little bit risk adverse in that for our members that reach out, we do refer them to a specific estate lawyer who will sit down with them and go through the process. This is not to say that some of those more cost-effective solutions won't result in the exact same outcome. Just my risk-adverse nature is that I'd prefer for you to pay a little bit extra and have a consultation with someone before going down that path. But
now, I've just looked up their website. They're backed by lawyers.
Yeah,
so
they have a law firm.
This has just turned into a big ad for them. So.
In less than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think there's a few things to put on my to-do list then. Is there a certain age when you think someone should have a will, or is it just like everyone should just do it?
I think, well, the risk adverse in me would be everyone should do it. But certainly once you're starting to work full time, I mean, I think there's merit because you're going to start saving, you're going to start investing. It might not be as simple as for one person. It could be a lot simpler than the other in terms of where they want funds to go. So we pose the question to all of our members and say, hey, is this something you've considered? You can have a chat to, where we work with a couple of estate lawyers. The chat's free just to kind of suss out if there's something that you want to explore. And then they make the decision based on that conversation as to whether it's worth whatever the cost is.
Bryce has told me he wants his family and friends to be fighting desperately over his assets.
No will for you then.
Take it or leave it. I won't be here.
Another common question that we see is around emergency funds. And I think for people in those earlier personas that we spoke about, fresh out of uni or fresh into the workforce and then accumulators, emergency fund is pretty simple. Try and get 3 months of expenses as like a basic rule of thumb. Try and get it to 6 if you want. If you've got insecure or uncertain employment, try and get it to 12 if that is possible. But that is a big ask. But there's sort of like the rules of thumb you see in personal finance. Books. But once you start getting later in life and there's more expenses and there's more dependents and just more variables, how do you think about emergency funds still? Is it still just 3 months of expenses or is there more complexity at that point?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the cash in the bank, exactly the same formula, 3, 6 or 12, depending on your circumstances. The less certain your income, probably the longer or the extra cash you want to have. And the formula works as you get older anyway, because yes, your fixed costs go up because you've got a massive mortgage and school fees and all this kind of stuff. So then the formula dictates that you should have more in cash. But great to have 3 months of cash sitting in a bank account, but if you don't have income protection, then what happens when that runs out? You start selling investments, you start selling properties, you start, that's when I've seen things, thankfully not at our firm, but I have seen things gone wrong. So it's good to have an emergency buffer. I'm on board with the formula. Don't forget about your income protection.
I'm going through the process of doing all the life insurances at the moment, and it's been eye-opening to see the difference between the default cover that I had in super or would have had in super versus what was actually
massive
required.
What dollar-wise, what cover did you have in super and what cover are you going to get?
250,000 in super, and they were recommending like 3 mil.
Whoa! Someone thinks a lot of himself.
No. But I can't. But that was because. Also, side note: running a small business really puts a handbrake on
insurance.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to insure you.
Well, the income that I'm insured for is not even close to our actual income because they look at the business and go, we're actually going to only insure you for this amount because success of business, all of that sort of stuff. So just like when we went to apply for mortgages, they're like,
they don't want to insure you.
Options are limited.
Yeah, they don't want to insure you for income that you're potentially not generating. right? Because they want to make sure that there's an incentive to go back to work. And getting insurance is not the easiest process. They're going to ask about your family history, your personal history, your lifestyle, like how often do you go to Coachella? And that's going to impact what the outcome of that insurance application is going to be. And again, if I think about this cohort, where, you know, the younger you are, the easier it is, generally speaking, to get insurance because there's less time for things to have gone wrong. And it's not a matter of applying and you just getting it. You go through this process for the insurer to determine whether they are comfortable to take you on as a risk. So anyway, coming back to your question around emergency buffers, the emergency buffer is not only cash in the bank, it's really clear in terms of what insurance you have, don't have, and what you're paying.
It was also an interesting experience to go. Sorry, we're going to go down a rabbit hole here, because they take into account like paying, like for life insurance, for example. If I were to die, it's like paying off all your debt on your mortgage and all of that stuff. So Harriet, my wife, is like not sorted, but like, so she's not, oh my God, I'm just left with a pile of debt that I need to pay off.
Yeah.
So yeah, all of those things, if you're just on a default level, like could just be so inadequate. So
sure.
definitely worth doing. A question that comes through our Facebook group a lot is around couples, and one of the couple being more engaged than the other.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for clients to help in those conversations around money and to make it feel a little bit more like a team effort?
Yeah, great question. One of the biggest financial decisions you ever make is your life partner, right? And for better or worse. And it's in most relationships, certainly what we see there is one more engaged than the other, as you alluded to, Bryce. And the thing that I anchor on when working with a couple is, what does success look like for both of you? So what are the goals that we're working towards? I want to buy a house. I want to work less. I want to move from a 5-day to a 4-day work week, et cetera, whatever that may be. If the person that's focused on the finances is telling their partner, you need to spend less, we're spending, I don't know, I'll use round figures, we're spending $1,000 a week, we need to reduce it to $800 per week. Great, from a financial perspective, that might be a good decision. But unless your partner understands where that $200 per week is going and what's the purpose of it, there is no incentive for them to reduce how much they're spending. So something, and I can talk to personal experience, so something my partner and I do every single year is we sit down and we think about what are the goals that we want to drive towards this year. I do the spreadsheet and the numbers, and he understands if we stick to this, if we stick to the $800 per week or the $500 or whatever we set, and we go to Bali instead of Europe or whatever the case, whatever the trade-off conversation is, we're going to achieve that goal. So he doesn't need to be in the day-to-day. There's only usually one that's in the day-to-day, but he knows that if we reduce our spending by $100 per week, we're also going to be able to invest more, which means that in X amount of years, we'll be able to move down to 4 days instead of 5. So tying it, just spending less for the sake of spending less means absolutely nothing. But if the person that's looking across the finances is having a conversation around, if we spend this is how much we're going to be investing, which means that in this time frame, this is when we'll be able to pull back to that 4-day work week, but that we both want, that's going to be much, much more inspiring.
Yeah.
When do you know you're ready to have kids financially?
Nice.
I think is the question. Is there a dollar figure? Is there a percentage of income saved? How much does a kid even cost?
Yeah.
I think obviously people can make things work at any time and in any circumstance, but how do you sort of get clients to that point? So
the thing that I anchor on when chatting to young couples that are looking at starting a family is first and foremost kind of try and work out what the costs are. Biggest cost is the fact that typically the household will go down from 2 incomes to 1. So it's not necessarily the pram or the best car seat or whatever the case may be. It's that costs money, but it's the household going from 2 to 1 income. So what we would do in that circumstance is work out, okay, over that 12-month period, and I always plan for 12 months. Why is that? Even if usually it is the mother that's taking time off, not in all cases, but if they go, oh, I only want to take 6 months off, and then I'm happy to get back into it, or 9, or whatever the case may be, we like to plan for 12. Why? That just ensures that there's space for them to take the time if they choose to. So we would never want to put ourselves in the position where we have to go back to work sooner than we feel that we're ready. So we plan for the 12. In terms of the cost, what we think about is what are the fixed costs over that period? What are the non-negotiables? The mortgage, the rent, the things like that. How much money do we need for that? And then how much do we need for the day-to-day? And we then make sure that we're really clear in terms of what the parental leave policies are at their employer. So if the employer provides 3 months, hypothetically, of paid parental leave, then we know we need to cover the cost or half the costs for the remaining 9 months. So beyond that, it's then a conversation around, okay, do you envisage going back to work part-time or full-time? And then if we were to go back part-time, can a part-time plus a full-time salary then cover the bills and the expenses and things like that, moving forward, and then also taking into account childcare. So there's not a set figure.
Yeah, it's not like 100 grand saved, you're good.
No, because everyone's costs and incomes and things like that are different. But it is about being really clear. Make sure we understand what the parental leave policy is. Make sure, I would encourage you to plan for a 12-month period. Make sure that you've got enough money for the period that you're not on the 2 incomes to cover the bills and the day-to-day, so that the non-negotiables for the remaining 9 months. And then all said and done, that should be adequate to get you through that period. Think about what going back to work may look like. And this is a really challenging question, particularly for someone that hasn't even conceived yet. To think about taking time off and then going back to work is a big question. But think about, okay, maybe it is three or 4 days. Maybe it is part-time as opposed to full-time. And then think about how that would impact the overall cash flow position when you do get back.
A lot to think about.
It's cash flow.
Everything comes
I
to
think,
cash flow.
I think that's a nice place to end it. We started for people just entering the workforce. It's get your cash flow sorted, and then potentially decades later, as your life has completely changed, the message is the same.
Yeah,
it's cash flow.
Yes. Cash flow
in some ways, there's beauty in that simplicity.
So cash flow enables you or gives you an insight in terms of what you can and can't achieve. Nothing else. If you're investing in an ETF that gives you 5 or 15% return, that is, if you can put $500 instead of $1,000 in that said ETF, that's going to have a far bigger compounding impact as to whether it's a 5 or 15% return.
Yeah. As Morgan Housel wrote in one of his books, the biggest determinant of your future wealth is your savings rate.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. If you have a question for Glenn or any of our other advisors, head to equitymates.com/contact. If you would like to have a conversation with Glenn or any of our other advisors, no obligation, free initial chat with the team to see if it is right for you. Head to equitymates.com/advice and we'll connect you with the team. Plenty of Equity Mates are now in conversations with the Fox and Hare team and getting great results. So we do appreciate the time that you're spending with them, Glenn, and the time that you've spent with us today. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.